So there's almost like this pathologizing of suffering, even, and it makes us less human in the way that one of the ways it makes us less human is in disrespecting the dignity of us, but also in turning us into purely physiological machines.
Gracious gang, I'm Mike Creevy, and this is the Gracious Guest Show, and I'm so delighted that you've joined me here today to dive into a really interesting topic with a former student. I'll get to that in just a second, but before we do anything, if you haven't yet, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. You get all the content coming at you. Great interviews and a wide variety of topics, but always something focused on the intersection of faith and culture in some way, shape, or form. And so subscribe to the channel, make sure you like it, share it far and wide, it really helps boost the channel. Today I am delighted to be joined by a former student of mine, Mr. Peter Forstmeier, who will before too long be Dr. Peter Forstmeier, God willing. Peter sent me his bio here, and it's very impressive, and I remember him back from basically his freshman year. I think it was my first year, one of my first years teaching high school, and now here we are all these years later, and it's just a real delight to have him on. He studied biochemistry and molecular biology at Penn State University. Then he got into studying the role of RNA structures in evolution, and then he recently has, in the last few years, has migrated to Hershey, Pennsylvania now, where he is studying in a combo med school and graduate school program, where he is doing a special focus on neurodegeneration and dementia with a focus on ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Running summer internship programs for undergraduates, and moving into a study here and a real interest, personal interest in medical humanities and bioethics, which we discuss at length in this video. But let me just read here the description he gave, which I think is fantastic. He said, "I've mostly been studying medicalization and how death is viewed clinically, culturally, and educationally in the medical community." He's also involved heavily in the foster care system, where he's a court-appointed special advocate for children. And among other things, Peter is a very devout Catholic, takes his faith very seriously, and I'm delighted to be able to have my former student and now the teacher in so many ways in this wonderful interview, talking about these important issues that take into account how we view death, how do we view life, what's the role of medicine, are there limits to medicine? Do we just do whatever we can do, or are there certain lines we shouldn't cross? All kinds of fascinating bioethical questions that we get into here. So I'm delighted to share this interview with Peter Forstmeier. Check it out. Peter Forstmeier, the one and the only. Welcome to the Gracious Guest Show. This is iconic.
I'm so happy to be here. It's been a long time in the making, and I couldn't be more excited.
Well, you were there from the get-go. I think, were you part of the original crew? Because I don't remember who it was, but somebody back in like your high school days was the first person to come up with the idea of the Gracious Gang being the name for the viewers of this podcast or listeners back then. So yeah,
you were there. I think it was way back then.
From the get-go. So this is really exciting because we happened to bump into each other just randomly, a year or two ago now, almost, well, I guess a year and a half, at a pro-life event, in Hershey, and we had this quick catch-up. My mind was blown, and here you are in medical school, and I'm like, how old are you? Like, I lose track, like, where's everybody at? So why don't you just give us just a little quick kind of brief bio, and what sets the stage for this discussion about medical humanities?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mr. Creevy was my theology teacher in high school, several wonderful years. I went to undergraduate at Penn State for biochemistry and microbiology, and then I went to MD PhD school. So I did 2 years of preclinical medicine, so in the classroom, taking exams, board examinations, and then I'm switching over to the PhD, so I'll get a doctorate in biomedical sciences, and so I'm doing research, computational and biological research using fruit flies to model Lou Gehrig's disease. And in that time, throughout, especially in these years of medical school and graduate school, I've become really interested in bioethics and medical humanities, which I find really interesting. So hopefully at the end of all this training, which will be many years from now, I think your kids will be in high school or past high school by the time I'm done.
12 more years to go.
And then maybe I'll be able to see patients on my own. But
Yeah.
yeah. So I would love to see patients probably 1 day a week, and they're like sort of like a rare disease clinic, and then
Yeah.
a few days a week doing just bench work.
Yeah.
Excuse me, lab bench work, doing pipettes, etc.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and it's excuse me, the for me, like I have no medical background myself, but I am a human and medical things happen to me. Uh, so on occasion, case in point, a complicated fun knee situation that's developing right now that not to get into all the details of that, but what's been amazing to me is like how little has to go wrong, right? And how much has to go right every single day, for us to sort of maintain this equilibrium and so many things we take for granted. So, so for you, was this, obviously I'm assuming that your own kind of experience and interest in the complexities and the intricacies of the human body and the human thing, and maybe especially your faith perspective, which I know is going to play into this quite a bit. Um, did you know from a pretty early age that you wanted to get into medicine, and were these different kinds of streams into that, or is that a more recent develop?
It's all recent. I had
Okay.
no idea for since forever. Even throughout
Yeah.
high school, I didn't know. It wasn't until maybe first or second year of college that I had an
Okay.
inkling that I wanted to do it. Um,
Wow.
and that was because I was just following what I was interested really. So I was really
Yeah.
interested in chemistry in high school. And I was, okay, maybe chemistry, chemical engineering. So I did chemistry, and then for the first year, I was in chemistry, and everyone was talking about how they do research, and that was that's what most of the teachers said. Well, if I want to stay in chemistry, I should figure out if I want to do research or not. And so I joined a
Right.
research lab, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then we started
Yeah.
doing biological research, and I was like, well, maybe I want to do biology research, or maybe clinical research, or maybe be in the clinic. And then I
Yeah.
did an internship that was a MD PhD internship. And I was like, oh, I don't have to choose. This is great. I can do both if I want to. So
Sweet. Well,
yeah,
that's so. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
and I was actually pretty very skeptical initially of medical humanities.
Hmm.
And that's one of the big selling points for. I'm in school at Penn State in Hershey for medicine, and one of their big selling points is they were the first medical college in the country to do humanities, and they remain one of the strongest and the most pronounced medical
Yeah.
humanities programs in the country for medicine. And
Yeah.
so I didn't really care about that. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll take some humanities classes, learn something, plus or minus maybe, and that'll be
Yeah.
fine. And initially, it felt like a bit of a waste of time. The stuff we were talking about, it was either very basic, sometimes it was pretty controversial or political, and I was like, okay, this doesn't feel good or right. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I learned I my dad recommended a book by Ivan Illich called Limits to Medicine, Medical Nemesis, Expropriation of Health. And it was actually
Hmm.
retitled by each publisher when
I
it
saw that
became
when I was,
like,
getting the link below for people. Yeah. It's
yeah,
kind of all packed in there.
yeah. So each publisher, he just Ivan Illich, when he published it, he was kind of a firebrand, and it was a milestone book that he published, and what he liked to do was he just wanted to be medical nemesis, and the publisher said, listen, we gotta backpedal this a little, we gotta soft landing here, Ivan. And so then it was Limits to Medicine, and then the second
Yeah.
publisher was like, okay, even more, Expropriation of Health.
Yeah.
But I read it, and it was a beautiful book, and it illustrated a whole bunch of different questions having to do with how medicine changes what it means to be human. Not just that
Yeah.
it helps physiologically and it heals people and these things, but it can hurt people a lot, and B, that it changes our perceptions of ourselves, of our health, of
Yeah.
life and death. It's really, really quite profound.
Well, and Will, I didn't tell you this ahead of time, just came to mind now. Like, not to like try to immediately make the video incredibly controversial, but like to again soft pedal it my own way a little bit. I think a lot of us got a taste for this, and we don't have to go into this, per se. It's a whole other show, but I think a lot of us got a question of this, like the philosophy, and the deeper questions of how are we envisioning the role of health in life with the whole pandemic, and to see the limits to which, depending on where you were at, who you were, and your neighbors and family and whoever, like it was really a lesson I don't plan on forgetting anytime soon of, and I guess for me, like from a faith perspective too, and in my own life, my own questioning of like, okay, well, what's my priority here? How far am I willing to go? to, preserve my physical life, my physical health? Do I really believe that all we are is at the end of the day a physical entity or a material entity, or is there something deeper? So this really does touch on a lot of issues from you know science to policy to faith, of course. But maybe, like, depending on how we want to get into this, do you want to, like, share with us a little from the notes that we were talking about beforehand? How do you see this bigger question of, like, the medical institution, kind of where things are now, things you've noticed maybe, or things you're researching about, like, kind of how that does, like you said, shape a lot of how we look at just the experience of being human, so interconnected to this institution.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and you're exactly right about the pandemic. That it not only did it bring healthcare to the forefront of everybody's mind and what is good to prevent, what is the role of government, but it also changed the conversation in a very important way. Previously, when you had controversies over healthcare decision making, like abortion, um, euthanasia, or this drug is good, I don't want to do this drug. It was all an individual level.
Right,
Whereas when it became the pandemic came through, it was these interventions need to happen on a community and a societal level, and so it changed
right,
the conversation dramatically in that way, and it really brought the quote unquote medical institution to the forefront of the conversation. And so, sort of the what the medical institution is it's actually a little tricky to define, because your doctor, your primary care provider, or your nurse practitioner, or whatever. Um, it doesn't seem like they're an institution. They're helping you out. You ask them questions, and yet there's this whole apparatus in which they sit, and they're not.
mm,
I wouldn't say like a complicit part of it or something like this,
right,
or this big conspiracy. But the medical institution is just the institution that manages health in the country and in the world. That's a compilation of the culture, the practices, the research that goes into it, the people, and the people can be the care providers themselves, nurses, doctors, and then the administrators and bureaucracy that helps keep all those together and functioning.
right.
Yeah, so it's sort of like this large body of practices and people that's enforceable, I guess, is the best way to describe the medical
Well,
institution.
and would you include in that, or would it be a whole separate question? Of course, like the all of the issues surrounding cost and that sort of thing, like the insurance apparatus that's very much in it, and potentially problematic,
Oh,
and so because that. Would you think it's fair to say, and I'm no expert on this, but it seems just in my own experience that, and some research I've done, that you know, it the who gets to sort of hold the purse strings and that sort of thing, it weighs enormously into questions of care and what's available and what people can sort of receive and care and that sort of thing. That's a big part of this, I would assume,
oh,
right?
definitely. So, I mean, the easiest way to show that the healthcare management and the finances of healthcare impact the medical institution and quick care is that the different ways that it's managed change the ways people's lives live. It changes what drugs they have access to, what treatments they can get, whether or not their insurance covers it, whether or not Medicare or Medicaid covers it, what is offered by that hospital or surgery center where you're at. So certainly that's a part of it.
Right. Yeah, because we run into that a lot just with basic things where it just seems so complicated, right? Like the sort of infrastructure side of it, where we had a baby last year, and there's all those things where it's like, okay, is this in network, out of network, like adjacent to the like there's all these kind of that can be so easy when you're in the moment, when you're making decisions and stuff, where it's just, I guess, for us, and the question I would kind of turn this back to for you, or to you, would be, you know how do we how do I want to ask this? How do we, in the midst of all of this kind of complication, try to keep track of the questions, the deeper questions of what it really means to be human? What, how much pain, is pain just something that should just automatically be eliminated? Or, like, I've seen more and more research saying that's the wrong question. We should be, looking at it more from the standpoint of, what's, how much can you handle? How much is manageable? Like, managing pain versus eliminating it. Um, what exactly are these limitations of medicine, and who gets to decide, right? There's a lot of different ways we could go with this, but I don't know if there's anywhere you kind of want to particularly focus on.
Yeah, but they're all interesting questions about the limits and about the goals of healthcare that come up with this
I
because
think I asked you
sort of
eight questions in one there. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's
well, one of the things is that the way that it's set up, the whole healthcare system in the medical institution, is it's hard to break out of it, and it's hard to frame your questions in a way that are independent of it. So, like for instance,
yeah,
you're talking about giving your family adding another child, and it was like, okay, the options are go to the hospital and give birth, or maybe contact a midwife and do an at-home birth. But I don't know anything about that. And is it this alternative medicine with crystals and whatnot? That so it's like the the way that it's set up the medical institution is it's hard to choose other options. And one of the
yeah.
reasons it's hard to choose other options is because we don't have a lot of good other options. Like I
Mm.
mentioned, the crystals and whatnot. But there are other ways. You know, actually, midwifery is actually a very uh,
That's my,
professional
my
and a
my
very
brother and his
effective
wife
practice.
have done that typically, and they've had
Yeah.
they're the only ones like I know personally who have done that, and we've sort of seen it more
Well,
firsthand. So there's I know
you
it's
can
there.
you can sort of point to the way that the medical institution has changed things because now it's an anomaly to give birth at home when that was the norm.
Right.
It's an anomaly to and for years now less so, but it was an anomaly to have a woman help you give birth when for almost all of history it was a female dominated profession, midwifery.
Hmm.
Whereas for the last maybe 80 years most obstetricians have been male, and of course that's changing now, but
Hmm.
in the way that different forceps were used, the way that neonatal nursery is used, that all these things that seem to normal to us are actually quite novel,
Right.
and and it's an anomaly and it's strange for somebody to choose something else. And if we, as with birth, so with death, that it's also almost an anomaly to die not with a doctor nearby, not with a nurse
Hmm.
with a BP machine. It's almost people describe dying. Some people have described dying at home alone as it's an inhumane death, whereas
Mm.
those same people would describe dying in a hospital bed with all these machines and IVs as a
Yeah.
humane death when there's almost more of a cyborg than a human at that point.
Right.
But so I guess my point is that the way the medical institution is changing the way we view humanity, also changing the way we die, the way we're born,
Hmm.
the way we live.
And do you think there's a danger here? I'm just curious with um the the pressure that patients might feel, and I think you had a note here. I forget where it was exactly, but they're talking about control, right? The perception of controlling things, and you wanna get it right. Oh, I think you had the note that was about, like, if somebody dies, there's this, like, the feeling of, maybe from the medical side of things, like a failure, right? Like, what else could we have done? Um, do you think there's a danger, maybe putting my faith hat on here a little bit, of of getting away from that assumption, or not just assumption, but what we've known forever, right? Until maybe recently, that just death is this unconquerable reality, that it is part of life, it is inevitable. I get the sense from some of the things I read and just things you hear kind of in the media, like with certain technological advances and such, that seems to be more and more on the table, maybe as the faith kind of like takes more of a back seat in the culture in so many ways. At least seems to me like there's more of this maybe death doesn't have to happen, maybe we really can conquer it, kind of almost the new Tower of Babel, right? This kind of like, we're going to defeat this thing. So do you see a problem there potentially, for someone, let's say, of like you, like someone of faith in the medical community, where how do you balance that, right? You're right at the heart of it. You're looking at all this research, and maybe we can, extend human life even for centuries. But at the end of the day, right, there's this theological, like, no, we die, and this is not this is not our final sort of destination. How do you kind of go about maybe approaching that? I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, you're exactly right from the standpoint of physicians, and there's a large body of research that indicates that death is a taboo in the hospital for physicians, for nurses, that their whole goal is to keep somebody alive and keep them healthy. And
And good.
honestly,
Like, I mean, I just want to be clear. I'm glad that's their approach, because it
yeah,
isn't, as we can get into. It's not everywhere
that's true. Yeah,
necessarily. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So more so, you're right that you're pointing to something deeper. It isn't necessary to keep somebody alive; it's to solve the problem.
Yeah.
is the whole goal. They're problem solvers. And so the way you can frame the problem is this person, we can't let this person die. It's taboo for them to die. And so we're going to deploy every technology that we have, for in the ICU with all the different drugs, the pressors, etc. And that actually may denigrate their dignity as a person, the patient that is.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you can say, well, the problem is this person should die. That I'm actually going to push a lethal dose of morphine or whatever the drug is and euthanize them or
Mm.
assist them in dying, medical killing more like.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, you're right that in that there's an element of control for the medical institution that they enjoy controlling death, that they can enjoy it, and so they control life as well, and they feel a need to. But also, this is a cultural wide phenomenon that people also want to control their death. They I can't remember who this quote is from, but people no longer pray for a good death; they pray for a long life.
Ah.
They look to see the ways that they can control their death, that's timing, and it almost exclusively is to push it forwards, but it's also to end it prematurely. And so in demonstrating almost a rebellious control over life, that I'm not going to um, let's say integrate whatever the hand that has been dealt to me, I'm going to take control. Either I'm going to end life now through euthanasia, suicide, or I'm going to delay death as long as possible.
Yeah.
The And it's sort of like this, almost like there's indignation for the right to a good death, the right to a quote unquote natural death. You'll note that we're so uncomfortable with dying that we don't like dying when there's a cause. If somebody dies of the flu, we need to have more flu shots. Or of an infection, we need to develop a new antibiotic. For cancer, we need a new cancer therapy. Anytime somebody dies with a definable cause, that's an issue that we need to solve. So
Mhm.
we're only comfortable when there's dying, when there's no cause of it. It's just a quote unquote natural death. They die in their sleep. And that's sort of interesting because as medical research moves forward, we define more ways to die. Um, and
Yeah.
that's because, and that's a good thing, I would say, to define the ways that people die
Yeah.
and to prevent them. But it's part of what I'm saying. It's part of this new view on death that
Yeah.
can be detrimental.
Well, it's so funny. I feel like there's my guess is that there is, you know, this of course, we could get into the whole scientism, phenomenon, the reality of this, you know, overplaying the hand potentially, so to speak, of what science is, what it's capable of, what it's for, and but with that maybe in the background of my mind, I'm thinking like it's fascinating to look at like different cultures and different cultural takes on it, because I'm just thinking as you're talking about this, I had a bunch of random things pop in there that are intriguing, like you know uh, some film examples. Because did you ever see The Last Samurai? It's fantastic, but there's a uh, Tom Cruise is the main character, but and he's an American soldier training Japanese soldiers, in the late 1800s as they're trying to modernize, and he ends up getting captured by samurai. But he's brought into this like world changing kind of realization of what the samurai are really about versus what he's been told. But they're it's not exactly, let's say, fully Catholic notion, of course, of death and sanctity of life, because you do have certain elements like taking your life, if you've been shamed and these sorts of things. But he has defeated this other warrior in battle, and then he comes to find out that he's being housed in that guy's widow's home, and she's caring for him, and he's understandably like. He says to the main Japanese character, he's like, "I killed her husband." Like when he finds out who it is, and it's her brother that he's talking to, and he just very sincerely says, "It was a good death." And there's this notion of like, you know, yeah, it was a good way to go. Like in our way of life, that it's filled with honor and meaning and all this kind of stuff. But I almost wonder, if there's any room, maybe not for that kind of mentality, but any idea of like honor or dignity. The only language I hear with like the idea of death with dignity tends to be co-opted in the sort of euthanasia arguments. Is that a fair framing? At least what I've seen, that's the death with dignity means I'm going to help this person by directly killing them, which is very different, right?
Yeah, and I think it gets back to the sense of what dignity actually is. You know, I
Yeah.
don't think it's dignified. By the way, you're correct that when you say anything with death and dignity, it's a euphemism for usually people who support euthanasia and medical
Right.
assisted killing. That dignity is not that. Dignity is not being killed, or somebody allowing you to kill yourself, or even killing you.
Yeah.
That's not dignified. Choosing that way is not dignified. Dignity is very different. Dignity is being valued as a human being in the image and likeness of God, as a unique individual, as an object of love, and you know,
Well, and
stopping that.
regardless of like the quality of life, right? I mean, isn't it just like just the fact that you are, right? Like by nature,
Yes,
you know, um, yeah. Sorry, I just that
and
was
yeah,
because the utility thing really, of course, comes into this a lot. Like, because you'll hear people say, right, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot. This idea of like the quality of life, the contribution they can make, their ability to do such and such. Those same arguments are used for, on the other side, right, of the spectrum too. That's why I think it's so important to mention, um, even sometimes those in the pro-life movement, I think, make a mistake, maybe not as serious, but when they say you shouldn't, you shouldn't kill this child in the womb because they might, become a great painter or a great statesman, because then the person can flip it and say, well, yeah, maybe they're the next Hitler. So that's a dangerous. I think that's not the argument I think to have. It's about just the reality of what is this creature, what is this human being.
and to, what I mean by dignity is,
Yeah,
if somebody will say, well, it's not dignified that somebody has to clean and change my bedpan, that I need to be spoon fed, or these things. I disagree based on that definition of dignity. That it is dignified when somebody is exercising compassion and love for you. That is operationalizing your human dignity that given by
yeah,
God in a way that um, assisted killing doesn't.
right.
So in that way, assisted killing is saying you are not made in the image of God. You are not an individual human person. Instead, you are not a functioning member of society. You're a drain on my resources, or even you are presently in suffering and pain, and that I view as undignified. So I'm going to end it.
Yeah.
So I think though that way to view dignity as a avenue and a well source of grace, compassion, and love, I think changes the whole conversation.
Well, and I'm really inspired here to mention and just share. I won't share too many details, but it just I always think of so my grandfather passed away ultimately it was 2008. I was in Iraq at the time, but he had struggled with Alzheimer's and very very serious deterioration for many years. At least 10, maybe as many as 15 or 20, depending on how we retroactively kind of remember the markers looking back on it. And I remember doing some research in college when he was getting in those final years because I was curious about it. And I learned that basically from all the prevailing research, like, how there's those tiers of, like they'll be at a certain tier and then there'll be a noticeable drop to a whole new level and that becomes the norm. Every one of the average kind of lengths of those digressions, his was like exponentially longer, than like the norm. And it was, and he was particularly prone to violence and suspicion, and you can imagine, like, in your head you feel like everybody's out to get you, and this, and the perception of what's really going on versus the reality of it, it's so scary. And so, to make a real long story short, my father became his primary caretaker for many years. And my dad would get up each day, knowing that what his morning entailed ahead of him was, arguments and my grandfather fighting him as he tried to wash him and take care of him and everything. And um, needless to say, that's not the kind of thing you look forward to. And again, to make a real long story short, without divulging too much, I got to see in my dad, and he's shared this, firsthand, that as horrible as that was, and it was awful. It was genuine, terrible suffering, for all of us in different ways. He had so many opportunities for growth and for forgiveness of things from their past, and the experience in this horrible situation, the beauty that came through it, and the the closure in certain ways, the things that never could have happened realistically, right? If that hadn't been the context in those final years, that I fear that we, in our understandable attempt to, like, let's just fix it, fix it, right? Or put it away, right? Like you tuck the person who's hard to handle away where you don't have to deal with them. The experts deal with them, and we get that, and I get it, but I just feel like there is something very, very much about our human reality, our human experience that we miss out on if we remove from our normal human life the possibility of having to make sacrifices for the suffering person, if that makes sense.
No, it
So
entirely
I
is.
get that, like my knee right now, I was praying this on the way home. My knee is bothering me. Like I want it fixed. I want it, but it's made me walk slower, and that makes me angry. But I've tried like 2 or 3 times today. Maybe I complained 50 times, but maybe 2 or 3 times I actually consciously went, walking slower has its advantages. I notice more. I take my time. Maybe I appreciate once in a while. I'm not perfect. Like life slows down. Like I don't know. There's just I think there is something that we're missing when we focus too much on the technical, like the techne, right? The solution. So I guess I'm rambling, but I'm curious, like how is that approached in your experience in the classroom, in the hospital, where I mean, I would hope, even if someone's not coming from an overtly Catholic perspective, I would hope that even secularly there's some appreciation, right, for the things that doctors see, the forgiveness that can happen, like these cathartic human moments that can come, right, at the heart of that those moments of suffering and stress and trial. I don't know.
Absolutely. It's a, and I can't remember which doctor or whoever said this to me, but they said the heart of the profession is a confrontation of suffering, which is,
Wow.
it's just beautiful, and it's true. And the, we see it all the time. But the issue is that often there's an attempt, as this, and this is the beauty of that, is starting to be crowded out by the technique of the medical institution. That is, now there's stages of grief, and if you're going too slow on the sad part of grief, then we're going to set you up with a counselor. That, well, maybe I had a very special relationship with my wife, and I'd like a little bit more time to grieve than maybe
Yeah.
is normal. So there's almost like this pathologizing of suffering, even, and it makes us less human. In the way that one of the ways it makes us less human is in disrespecting the dignity of us, but also in turning us into purely physiological machines. That
Yeah.
there is that even if we do have a soul, it's sort of a separate part of us that leaves and maybe comes back someday. But our bodies are just meat that can be replaced. And
Yeah.
grief is just a chemical reaction that needs to be pushed along and then eliminated entirely.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the key with suffering that I've started to appreciate is that it shows so much the beauty and the grace of our Savior and our salvation, that not only has it been defeated, but it has been totally transformed and sanctified. Same with death, that death and suffering initially being a punishment, from, if you look in Genesis, being a punishment, is now the way that our lives face eternity. That Jesus' death and his suffering brings our suffering and death to him. And
Yeah.
now in that way, a good death is a good thing. To die
Yeah.
and to see the beatific vision is a
Sister
good thing.
death, right? That's Saint Francis of Assisi. Yeah.
Mm. Yes, yeah, and that, so in that view, it's like, okay, well, if we take all that this Catholic stuff and transpose it back into medicine, it's like, okay, and what I do as a researcher fighting neurodegenerative diseases and death, okay,
Hmm.
well, death necessarily isn't to be avoided. And I'm certainly not advocating for euthanasia or medical killing right now, but it's to say that death isn't the worst thing that there is.
Yeah.
The worst thing that there is a total separation, disrespect of the human dignity, and sin.
Yeah.
The ideal being the good death. We
Hmm.
look at Saint Joseph, the foster father of our Lord, for his example. He is the patron saint of good death, surrounded by family members, in a way not clutching his life and keeping it for himself, but giving of himself. And it was a testament to his life of total giving to the mother of our Savior and our Savior himself. That
Yeah.
in life, so as in death, that he was giving himself in life, and in death he gave himself back to our Creator.
Hmm.
And I think this, I know I can tell by several things in your background that you're a big Tolkien fan, that this is
Yep.
that this is something that Tolkien actually, in his
You read my
letters
mind.
that
I was
he
going there next.
yeah,
Yeah.
that death is central, and the types of death are central to his whole mythology, and that the
Yeah.
way that he sets it up, and this is
And
from his letters.
he said that. That's not
Yeah,
just our interpret. Like he was very clear about like death is at the center. Yeah.
death is at the center. Yeah, and the central way he did that was by setting up the elves who are immortal, physically
Yeah.
immortal, versus the humans, the men who are physically mortal, and they envy each other and they're jealous of
Yes.
each other, and then that sets the stage for the whole cosmos. But this is my interpretation of what it is. But I think he gives us throughout the main series a series of examples of what death is and how it can go. From Aragorn, Boromir, Gollum, and Denethor. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
familiar your following is with Lord of the Rings. If I should provide some more
Yeah.
background,
That's what. Yep. Yep.
yeah.
I'm
So
always I'm pretty familiar, but always learning, and I'm sure I'm guessing a lot of people in the in the viewership are as well interested for sure.
So I'll start with the bad deaths that he gives. So Gollum
Mm-hmm.
is this gangly creature that is covetous of the ring and has been possessing him, and he's been possessing it for many years, and his has unnaturally extended his life. And throughout the whole story, without any spoilers, is he is seeking to get the ring, to continue obsessing over it, and continue the life as it is, to clutch
Yeah.
after it. And that's an example of a bad death, totally avoiding it. And on the
Right.
other hand, we have sort of the euthanasia death of Denethor. So Denethor is the Lord
Right.
Steward of Gondor, and in the end, as the story unfolds, he despairs and he seeks to be the master of his own fate. And even Gandalf, one of the chief characters, rebukes him and says, "You are not the master of life and death." And
Mm.
Denethor eventually commits suicide, and
Yep.
demonstrating that Tolkien is saying, listen, you can't covet after a long life. Neither can you covet after a short life. That is not up to you. Neither of these things are up to you.
Right.
Instead, he points to us to two other examples. So Aragorn, one of
And
the
if I may,
main,
like
yeah, yeah,
to achieve that, right, to achieve Denethor, for Denethor to achieve his goal, he completely foregoes all duty, right? Like all stewardship. Like he's supposed to be leading, he's supposed to be shepherding, he's supposed to be caring for his people, and all he's thinking about is his glorious,
himself. Yeah.
death of like he's going to do it his way. Yeah.
And even he is thinking of his own dignity also.
Yes.
So in a way, so is Gollum, but more so Denethor, that
Yeah.
in the futile pursuit of his own dignity, Denethor ends up throwing it away. Like you
Right.
mentioned, he is a figure who could be such an instrument of good, of inspiration, um, and yet he is focusing on himself to preserve his own sense of his state in life, and it ends up, as he kills himself, it ends up destroying all of his legacy, the way people remember him, and his duty is totally shirked. So in that way, his pursuit of dignity was entirely undignified.
Yeah.
And the good deaths, on the other hand, are Aragorn and Boromir. Aragorn being the one of the main protagonists, and he's going to become king and all these things. And in the appendices of the Return of the King, and he's part of sort of this ethnic group of mankind that is blessed with long life,
Right.
unnaturally long life, hundreds of years.
Yep.
And
That's
part of
the
that bless,
Numenor,
yeah,
right? It's the
yeah,
Atlanteans, basically. Yeah. Or
yeah,
something, right.
yeah, and part of it is this turning over of life that happens at the end of life for the Numenorians. So the good kings of old, what they would do is they would say, okay, well, I am nearing the end of my life. I can sense that part of my magical abilities, and I'm going to hand off the kingship to the next in line, and I'm going to just give my life back to the creator. Not in a way that was, again, like euthanasia. It was like a peaceful acceptance of death, as
Right.
opposed to, and as the Numenorian line descended into evil, the kings would clutch onto life until death and not renounce it, not give up their kingship until they died,
Right.
and not give up their life also. And Aragorn and his wife Arwen have this beautiful conversation in the appendices of Return of the King. I encourage you all to read it. When Arwen is very confused by this, like, why are you doing this? Why are you giving up your life? Don't you want to be with me? The sort of is the subtext there. And he's like, listen, this is part of my duty. The life that has been given me isn't mine. It's a
Hmm.
gift, and I have used it as much as I was able to help the world, to establish a righteous kingdom. And for me to grab at it now, to clutch to it and to keep it as my own is is a betrayal of the trust and the stewardship that have been given us. And
Yeah.
eventually he does.
Wow.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
section. I encourage you to reread it.
Yeah.
And then Boromir is another example. So Boromir is another race of man. He's Denethor's son, and he's very haughty. He's a very proud warrior. Eventually, he succumbs to sin and temptation, but his death is actually quite dignified. He dies in battle, and as you mentioned,
Hmm.
very honorable and self-sacrificing.
There's
And
valor. The virtue of
yeah,
valor is
valor.
something I want to do a whole other show about that because that's like,
Mm,
where is that in our mentality today?
mm.
Valor. But yeah.
Yeah, and he's not guaranteed a heaven. That's not sort of a thing, or a Valhalla. That's not a thing in Gondorian culture or in Lord of the Rings, really, to speak of. And and yet he gives his life up for the friends that he just betrayed in his fellowship. And
Yeah.
Tolkien spends a lot of time, more so than for pretty much any other character, detailing his death and his funeral service. The whole
Right.
opening chapter, the opening sections of The Two Towers, are them detailing how he died, how they sent off his burial, the logistics of it. That I think that's Tolkien signaling to us, like, yes, preservation of life and a willful giving it back, like Aragorn did, is a righteous way to do it. And also giving it to others. So either giving it back to your creators, to the creator, or giving it to others are valid ways of expiring. These are
Yeah.
keeping it for yourself in an attempt to live longer or covet things, as in Gollum, or to end it prematurely in a
Yeah.
selfish way. That is also undignified.
Well, and it's so funny because like from the I was going to say from the sublime to the ridiculous, not quite, but like I find this connection a little bit interesting because the ethic here, the could versus the should, and that fundamentally important ethical question. Um, so well, Lord of the Rings, and then a quick little transition, because we had mentioned in our chat beforehand, you had mentioned about Saruman, right? Saruman versus Gandalf, these two rival mentalities, and I think the line Tolkien had was that Saruman had a mind of metal and wheels, right? So it's all techne, it's all progress, just tear down all the trees, put up, just completely do whatever you need to do. And my note, I'd said to you that first I was thinking of the Nietzschean sort of will to power, and I haven't read a lot of Nietzsche, but a lot of people know that part, right? The idea of the Uberman and all this. But in that research, I found this quote from Francis Bacon, who, as I called it, a chilling aphorism he had in his work, The New Organon, where he said, "Nature exhibits herself more clearly under the trials and vexations, and some translations say tortures, of art than when left to herself." And that's like chilling, right? This idea of like, I'm going to come up with ideas for whatever reason. Maybe they're well intentioned, maybe not so much. And I'm just going to do this thing no matter what it takes. I'm going to steamroll everything I need to make this happen, no matter what the cost is. And the other quote I sent to you was, I always think of Ian Malcolm, specifically the Jeff Goldblum portrayal, right, in the famous Jurassic Park. That's that great scene when they're, John Hammond has just shown them the park. He's shown them like the absolute epitome of like modern technology and like, look at what we've done. Spared no expense. Remember, he keeps saying that over and over again. And Ian Malcolm's the first to throw cold water on it, and he has the guts to basically be like, time out. It's like, can we just like let's assess what we've actually done here. And that conversation leads to that great line where he says, I had the quote here. He says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. And in the book, the same version, that's the movie version. In the book, it's a little longer. He says scientists are actually preoccupied with accomplishment, at least very often. So they are focused on whether they can do something. They never stop to ask if they should do something. Or maybe we could say, to be more, maybe not enough, or maybe we could talk about that more. So what do you think here? about the. I guess what I'm asking is away from an overtly, let's say, Catholic, or just even some sort of, appeal to some kind of cosmic accountability. I'm just curious, like what that looks like again in the classroom or wherever as you're preparing to be a doctor. Because I would imagine like they're not like publicly advocating obviously any kind of particular religious approach, but how do you address these questions of like the ethics of could and should and what sort of determines that
Yeah.
sort of away from a religious mentality? I'm just curious.
Mm. Well, in the first place, what I would say, this discussion about with this advancing medical institution taking things over and all this technology, should we, could we? I would first say that, science is amazing. I'm a scientist. I do it every
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
Medicine's amazing. I do it every day. And that
absolutely.
in these discussions, our goal isn't to not help people suffer less. It isn't to help, you shouldn't be living so long. The ICU should be shut down. No, the goal is to have these interventions in a way that makes people more human, that makes people that operationalizes love more effectively.
Yeah,
And so people aren't lost. Doctors don't view the cases they see every day as, oh, your cholesterol's too high, your good cholesterol, your bad cholesterol, your blood pressure, and losing them in the numbers and these techniques. We
right,
want
right.
to bring humanity and love more to the forefront in these technologies. And that is a very a Catholic thing to say, but
Sure.
it is part of the sort of the whole milieu in medicine as well. In a lot of different, there's a bunch of different pockets that are sort of advocating for this change to occur. Um, but the idea of ethics and things, it's very controversial the way these things are decided. Usually for things that are pretty tricky, there's an ethics board at
Hmm.
every hospital. I've been interested in
Right.
shadowing them and figuring out what they do, but it's
Yeah, like
questions
do
like,
they do internships or that would be a neat opportunity.
yeah, so
Yeah.
they have like, for instance, they have students that do rotations with them to follow
Yeah.
them around, and so yeah,
Oh, very
the
cool.
ethics board is definitely, and so it's the questions of, is this person capable of making big decisions? Do they have the competence to do it? Have they lost their mind? Are they not able to understand?
Right.
Was this properly explained to them? So that's what a large part of what they do. But so that's how it sort of happens in the clinic. In the graduate school and research, there are a bunch of ethics boards in there as well. And
Mm.
usually, um, they have established a lot of guidelines professionally in professional organizations, which can be a little tricky actually, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
politicking involved with those.
Sure.
Politics on the national stage, Republican, Democrat, especially since the pandemic, we've seen a lot more of that, and the
Yeah.
different picks that are happening in the National Institute of Health, RFK, which HHS.
Hmm.
Um, so that's becoming more politicized. But in general, also, that the ideas, like, it isn't particularly popular to refer to euthanasia as medical killing. Um,
Right. Right. Right.
for instance. And so there's a lot of inflammatory language on both sides. But even before the pandemic, before RFK Jr. was center stage, that there is a lot of controversy with how these ethics are decided, what treatments are allowable in what situations.
Sure. Yeah, and I imagine it's with the you had mentioned here, this shift from like final causes to efficient causes, which is a whole other subject, but in the sort of classical philosophical sort of discussion there was more of an appreciation, I feel like, for looking at these different ends and these different causes, for basic things that we encounter in life or basic things about human life, so but there does seem to be a more focused shift in the modern kind of consciousness to efficiency. Actually, John Paul II, I think somewhere said he basically attributed, he, if I remember correctly, he has sort of attributed the build up to World War II, and then just like the darkness, the heart of darkness of a lot of the 20th century to an overemphasis on efficiency. And I always thought that was really interesting because if it's just if it slips into sort of a what can we do and how fast can we do it, you know, you're gonna, of course, make a lot of sacrifices along the way that you shouldn't. And I was thinking of actually two 300 references. You ever see that movie
Oh yeah.
with the Spartans? Oddly enough, one that came up when you were talking earlier, I think Ephialtes, right? The character who's kind of like a deformed kind of character in their Spartan perfection society. He's not seen as like perfect enough, right, to be a Spartan warrior because he has physical deformities, and he ends up becoming a traitor, right, to the Persians, and he kind of helps them against the Spartans. And right before the final battle, if you remember, uh, Leonidas, kind of giving voice to their whole like Spartan, like good death, kind of culture. He says something to the effect of he wishes him luck, or he has a sort of blessing to Ephialtes, and he basically says, like, I wish you a long life, right? Or like a long life, and that's like, and he hangs his head in shame. And there's this idea that that's actually like a curse, like to have this long, like trouble-free life from the Spartan mentality. It's like
Well,
you must not have had any, challenge or mission or, so again, that can be taken out of context, but like that was a neat thing. Um, and the other one I'll just throw out real quick was, the danger, the slippery slope, right? Like if we become too efficiency minded, even with the best intentions, and we've seen now at the time of our chat here that the report came out a few days ago about Canada now, like 1 in 5 deaths is from, as you said earlier, I love that phrase, medical killing, like just to put it out there. At what point are you like the Spartans wandering the battlefield, just chatting casually and just stabbing, you know what I mean? Like, it's extreme, but like, there's like groaning prisoner, like wounded people in the battlefield. And you're like, yeah, did you see the game last week? Oh, and not to make light of it by any means, but like, it might be a more sanitized version of that, but are we at the end of the day, you're ending somebody's suffering, but like, just, yeah, who gets to make that call? That's where I struggle with that, right? Like, how
and,
how does that work? What's the limit of medicine?
and not to disparage the healthcare providers in those situations, but it also tends
No,
to
yeah, not
eliminate
at all.
the suffering of them and the
Mm.
families too. That is okay. We finally have closure. Also
Yeah,
eliminates the financial suffering of the hospital. Now there's a new bed. That
right.
eliminates the financial suffering of the state of the medical institution. So it's a very
Yeah,
convenient thing to not have to pour out your life for somebody else.
yeah. Uh, well, I hate to say it, we're getting close to kind of the end of our time here for now, but like I just is there anything we didn't get to in particular you wanted to mention, or just and any kind of closing thoughts, just the final kind of couple minutes here?
Well, yeah, I'd offer the last thing. What you made me think of when talking about the life and the curse of life was Saint Peter, who I'm named after.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
potentially part of his shame in denying Christ, he was obviously fearful of his own life, and he was ashamed that he wasn't willing to die. But there was redemption for him, from our Catholic tradition, that he died not begging for his life, but to die in a way that was different than his Savior. That he
yeah,
don't he was so humble in his death, in his pursuit of his Savior, that that was his request, not for a longer life, but for a death befitting his station. And I
yeah,
think that's a beautiful thing.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, this is just a start. I've got links below from folks. I've benefited just from some questions I've had over the years, like the National Catholic Bioethics Center has some great resources, and I think they have a hotline too. For people that are, because like people who are, you're in the hospital, you're in this moment of trauma, and like you don't know if what this particular doctor, whoever it is, might be sharing something with you that you're not comfortable with from your faith, but you feel on the spot. They're wonderful with resources there for folks. So, but Peter,
Absolutely. There's a lot of
yeah,
medical jargon, there's a lot of controversial things, and
yeah,
it's very confusing. So always reach out for help. The
yeah,
National Center for Catholic Bioethics is a really great
yeah.
resource.
Well, I have like 50 more questions, but maybe, like, we'll catch up in the future. Maybe follow up with you and see how
Absolutely.
things are going. Thank you so much, Peter. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Great seeing
Yeah.
you.
Yep. Take care. What a delight and honor to have the tables turned there. Peter becomes the teacher. I get to be the student. And there's no greater honor I could think of. I'm very, very proud of him. I'm fascinated and just thrilled with the path ahead of him. So we'll keep in touch. and continue to see where we can go with this important discussion, really revolving around a lot of important key issues. I do want to make one clarification, and he called me out on this afterwards. I think we said in the recording with Canada's situation now with the medical killing, I think if we had said 1 in 5 deaths, if I said that 1 in 5 deaths, it's 5%. So I want to make sure I get that number right. So 5%, it's 1 in 20. That's still way too much. 1 is 1 too many, but I did want to clarify that. So thank you. Thank you, Peter, for catching me on that as well. So want to be accurate here as best we can. So thank you all for tuning in to the Gracious Guest Show. I'm Mike Creevy, your humble host. Delighted that you joined us today. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.